Good evening all and welcome. The brave military men and women certainly don't have it easy, regardless of which armed forces they're in. This video in particular is dedicated to the memory of one of our subscribers and a contributor to one of the stories in tonight's video. Dawna shared her father's story. Tonight is his 20-year death anniversary, so I thought it would be appropriate to honor him and his service by playing these stories today. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I have only told this story to 3 people outside the old military buddies who have similar stories to this experience. First, I need to set the scene. Tucked in a mountain valley in Balgan, Afghanistan, is a place called Russian Hill. Tapa Gorgan, as it's also known. We just call it Tapa. It's the only hill in this entire valley, and that is not by mistake. It is a burial mound that has existed since the times of Alexander the Great. Generations of locals have been buried here, and this also includes the dead Russians from the failed invasion back in the 80s. Now, what did the American Special Operations do when they came to this valley? That's right, level off the top and stick a combat outpost on it. So this is where my story begins. I was a regular army paratrooper attached to the Special Operations team that built the outpost. One of the roles of the regular army guys was to watch the radios at night. We would always get weird babble on them at night, but that could be written off as interface, though years as a radio operator for my team led me to think otherwise. I had that duty one night. Between 2:45 and 3 a.m. my shift ends, and I walk down the hill to our little bathroom area. I'm doing my business in this little cinder block hut with a hole in it when I hear walking up the hill next to me. I at first think nothing of it, probably just one of the local guards coming up for a shift change, but being in the middle of the night and me in a combat zone, I do listen and pay attention. I can hear the sound of gear rattling, which I know for a fact that our locals don't wear gear with meta-inch buckles or boots for that matter. I've been on patrol with them multiple times and they hang around the outpost, and I know what they sound like when they move. This wasn't that. This was the heavy-set boot steps of a soldier in combat gear. Now, not wanting to die on the throne, and the fact that I was one of very few Americans at this outpost, I decided I probably needed to know who was going up the hill. So I crack the door and peek outside, and holy hell bananas, there is someone on the hill. It happened to be a mostly full moon, and I had decent ambient light. They were carrying an AK, so not an American. They also had on a uniform that's not the typical Afghan garb, not one of our ALPs. At this point, they are close to the top of the hill, and this person is not someone from the outpost. I grab my rifle and pop out the door and run up the hill after them. I get to the top. Not a single person was around. I walk over to the building where the radio guard is and knock on the door. My buddy answers and asks what's up. I checked them to see if anyone else was up or came in there, and he said that no one had come out of the barracks. I bummed a cigarette and laughed about what happened. The next day, while eating lunch, we joked about it, and one of the special ops guys who had been there longer told us it was the resident Russian ghost. Claimed he started appearing after they used dirt from the hills to fill our HESCO basket for the wall. Turns out they found some bones while doing it. He even told us he had been face to face with it and even drew his sidearm. All the other guys kind of chimed in about their own creepy stories about the place. I got moved to another outpost a few weeks later. Always got super creepy feelings whenever we would visit there. I just graduated from boot camp. While I was there, some strange things happened to me and some other recruits that we could not explain, and I've come in search of answers. When you are in boot camp, you have to stand watch occasionally for a few hours. I was usually put on watch at night. Me and my partner usually stood watch from midnight to around 2 a.m. My job was usually roving security, which is basically the person who patrols a set area and takes temperature readings and looks for suspicious activity. Usually the most serious thing I deal with were other recruits messing around in the bathrooms and telling them to go back to their bunks. One night at around 2 in the morning, I was making my rounds and thought I heard talking coming from the bathroom. I went inside and heard whispering coming from the showers, so I walked towards them, and what I saw was just weird. I saw a young man, around 17 to 20, hunched over facing away from me in the darkest corner of the shower area. I walked towards him and said, "Hey man, I need you to get back to your bunk." And as I was approaching him, I swear he vanished into thin air in the blink of an eye. I remember the feeling of pure shock and confusion. When I walked out, the other guy on watch asked me why I was so pale, and I told him what happened. I told him exactly what I had seen, and he said it was most likely a result of me being tired from all the stress of boot camp and lack of sleep. I agreed with him because I figured, why would a ghost haunt a shower at boot camp of all places? And I was pretty tired that night. The next day I did not have watch, but the recruit who had my usual shift reported seeing a shadow in the showers and some weird whispering noises while there, despite the fact there was no one. I talked to him and told him what I had seen, and that it was most likely our minds playing tricks on us, because we were all tired. He agreed and decided we should just ignore it. That was until I started seeing things outside the showers. I had a slightly earlier watch that night, and I was patrolling the bunks checking on recruits who were sick, as I'm supposed to. I was walking past some empty bunks and saw some movement from the corner of my eye. I figured it was some recruits messing with me, so I go to tell them to go back to bed. But as I approach the empty bunks, I see some kind of shadowy figure that did not look humanoid to me. It was like a dark blob moving around. When I investigated, it vanished. The area it was in was extremely cold compared to the rest of the room. I just walked away as there was nothing to do there and figured that the staff must have cranked the air conditioning, and I was just tired, making stuff up. I saw this out of the corner of my eye all throughout boot camp while on the early morning watch. The last story for me was from when I was being tasked with taking temperatures throughout the whole building. My job was to go to each division's compartment and ask for their room temperature. I had just taken all but 2 other divisions' temperatures and was looking for the last 2. As I walked past some empty rooms, I could have sworn I saw movement inside, so I figured maybe I missed a room and went to look inside their window. The room was just being used as storage and was pitch black except for the light from outside. All I could see was some boxes and empty bunks, but out of the corner of my eye I saw a person standing in the edge of the light facing me. I saw this and decided I was just going to look elsewhere for the last 2 rooms, which I found a few minutes later. However, as I was returning, I turn, and in my readings I notice in the hallway a shadowy arm or limb being outstretched and coming back behind a doorway, and when I passed, there was nothing, but the area it was in was super cold, and that room was just a closed janitorial closet. The other recruit I previously mentioned spoke about seeing someone dancing in the showers at night, but there being nothing when he investigated. He also said that one night he passed by the showers and saw someone peek out and disappear behind the wall, and there was no one there when he investigated, but he noted the area was really cold. I know I'm going to get called a liar and attention seeker, but I know these are all true. I'm not here to try and fabricate stories or anything like that. I don't want to get into trouble, so I can't disclose where this all happened, but it was very, very spooky. This happened to my dad. I forget where they were stationed, Hong Kong perhaps, but he and his buddy, a seasoned soldier, had some time off, and they decided to see if they could hunt some wild boars which were prevalent where they were stationed. They would be heroes if they returned with a pig or two. As he and his buddy trudged through waist-high bush and tall palm trees, they came to a clearing where they could see off into the distance a whole load of some pretty choice pork out grazing, and their mouths watered. My dad asked, "How do we shoot one without the rest coming after us?" His buddy replies, "You shoot the leader and the rest will run away. Especially if they have babies, they will run away at all costs to protect them." So they watched the pigs for a long time, creeping closer so that they could get a good shot. They both finally decide which one was the leader, and they both took aim and shot him, dropping him where he stood. They waited for the rest of the Saunter to run with them, but they ran towards the two men that ended their leader's life, and my dad's buddy was correct in saying that they would do anything to protect their babies. But they did not back down. They can run up to 30 miles an hour and can weigh sometimes as much as 600 pounds and will fight with everything they have. The soldiers were in a field of waist-high bush with nothing but palm trees, and they threw their rifles and shimmied up 2 palm trees while the Saunter squealed and gathered around the base. As you can imagine, it was quite difficult to hang onto the trees with no branches to hold onto, especially just a straight trunk. Every time they thought the pigs were leaving, they would get the scent of their dead leader and squeal again and surround the base of the trees. The squealing rarely stopped, and was almost as bad as trying to hang onto the straight trunk of a palm tree. They would get the scent of the guys and would begin their squealing again in earnest. Now you may be thinking, this was just a bunch of wild pigs. What damage could they do? Well, wild pigs were one of the most dangerous animals you have to fight off. Their tusks and teeth are like razor blades and they're fearless, often killing lions that come after their babies. They can throw you off your feet, and then they can use their tusks and very large and hard heads to plunge into you, causing fatalities. This went on for several hours. They would move and the pigs would squeal. Finally, when the pigs were far enough away, they silently shimmied down the trees and ran back to base without slowing down, leaving their dinner and their rifles where they lay. They both had MREs for dinner and never told any of their fellow soldiers about the dinner they almost had that night. My story starts when I was stationed in the US Army, in Fort Drum, New York. I lived on a base in a garden-style apartment. Now I had given someone I knew a spare key to get in if I was away. There had been someone who lived in the upstairs apartment and the two beside me. One night I heard the sound of a rocking chair. I didn't think anything of it until it wouldn't stop. So I, being my short-tempered self, banged on the ceiling with a broom and went back to sleep. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps in my front room. I thought maybe it was just the neighbors upstairs hearing the noise again, so I got out of bed to see if it was the person I knew with my spare keys. Nope, nothing, and no one was out there. I went to turn off my bathroom light and went back to my bedroom and laid back down, then felt that there was a man standing over me. So again I thought it was a friend of mine, but no one was in the room. I don't know what it was about that, but every hair on my body stood on end and I felt chills. I then, bravely, pulled the covers over my head. Then I felt it again, but this time there was a very distinct growling in my ear, almost like a large dog or wolf perhaps. It freaked me out. I jumped up, slammed on my bedroom door and locked it. Luckily it was a Friday and I didn't have to go in the next day. Freaky, right? I've tried to remain skeptical about this, even though it's not the first experience I've had. Camp Dragoon in Iraq had weird things happen in different places. The camp was just an old Saddam regime secret police complex, so plenty of people disappeared there, just to add to the horrific background. The underground tunnel torture chambers had been walled off early, but people who went down there often reported the feeling of being watched. I took pictures in an old prison and weird balls of light showed up, and when I got them developed by the locals, I chalked it up to there being dust in the air. The one thing that happened over and over though, were the lights in the buildings appearing where they shouldn't be. I was part of the quick reaction force for the camp and was called out many times to look for intruders. We had an apartment building on our camp, unused but off limits, and at least once a month a guard tower, the Tactical Operations Center, or random people would report faint lights moving within. Every time we got spun up and cleared the whole building, but not even the dust had been disturbed. People being tired, reflections, soldiers being sneaky, I don't know, but it's weird and unexplained. I won't spread any of the National Training Center ghost stories I've heard, as they didn't happen to me, and they could be just legends at this point, but it sure as hell was freaky at the time. At the time, I was still at Fort Sill for some training. It was an interesting place to be. We would spend the weekends sitting around playing video games or going on liberty to explore the only mall in town, Lawton. Occasionally, we would be selected for Firewatch or duty. One Saturday, I had Firewatch. Not a big deal. I decided I'd chill in my room for most of it and make myself be seen every now and then. We had a gym below the main floor, and we would spend a lot of time in that gym. Firewatch was sometimes tasked with cleaning it up. There was a small walled-off section though. It used to contain an electric chair. I'm still unsure of the history of the building we were in, but it was next to a large cemetery. We would hear the occasional creepy story about the building and the electric chair, but I digress. That night I was asked to clean the gym, and then to mop the third deck. At the time, no one lived on third deck. My buddy and I cleaned the gym and walked up the stairs to mop. He mopped from the end to the middle, and I proceeded to mop the rest of the way to the stairs. We finished mopping, and my friend went to go skate in his room, while I told duty we were done. I walked back up the stairs to grab the mop bucket. I got up there and realized someone had walked all over the floor that we just mopped. So I looked down the hallway when I saw a humanoid-like figure, except it was pitch black. The pitchiest black I've ever seen. I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me, something I've never felt before, and I sprinted down the stairs and into my room, waking up my roommate. He thought I was messing with him when I told him what happened. After that, I never saw the figure again while I was there. It was honestly one of the most scariest experiences of my life. I joined the US Marines in the year 2000, and by 2003 I was in Iraq. While in Iraq, we had stopped at an RRP, repair and replenish point, and dug in for the night. That night there was no moon, and couldn't see any bright stars in the sky, so it was ridiculously dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I was sitting in my dug position using night vision goggles to keep an eye out for insurgents, when I heard the loudest and scariest scream coming out of the darkness. Then it got closer, but it became clear as the scream was above our heads. There was something flying above us or hovering that would every several minutes scream in a loud, screeching and frightening way. I can't even give it justice on how frightening this scream sound was. A couple of us heard it, but the weird thing is that not everyone that was awake could hear it. I tried to convince myself that it could have been a local bird or some type of owl screech. I even googled many different owl calls just to try and find something that sounded similar, with no luck. To this day, I still have no idea what I heard. Someone told me that it could have been a banshee, but I truly don't know. Has anyone who's ever served in Iraq heard anything similar? I was in the Marines from 2008 to 2012. I served as an infantry Marine and was stationed in 29 Palms, California. In 2009, while training for my first deployment, we went to a special school called MCCWMWS, Marine Corps Cold Weather Mountain Warfare School, which was located in Bridgeport, California. I enjoyed the 5-ish hour bus ride up Highway 395 through the Sierra Nevada mountains. I took in the beautiful scenery as my mind wondered about what I was in for, dreading climbing the 12,000-foot-plus mountains that littered the landscape. Weeks of training go by. I was relieved to hear that we were moving to a place called Hawthorne to do some live fire exercises, which was about 30 miles away to the east back into the desert. An old out-of-commission army base that was deemed uninhabitable in the 50s for various reasons. I was enthusiastic to escape the bitterly cold temperatures up the mountain, and I slept on the ride there. Upon waking up, I looked out the window and was shocked at what I saw. Remnants of the old base scattered the landscape, half-destroyed buildings, guard towers, and other typical military stuff you'd expect to see. Behind that lied a jagged lava rock mountain, casting their shadows over the destroyed buildings. The place looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off nearby. Have you ever seen the old nuclear test video from when it was first developed? They would stage a fake town to analyze what the blast would do. This place was like that, mixed with the game series Fallout and Chernobyl. As we drove in further, I noticed a bunch of mine shafts heading into the side of the mountain. Now I was very curious as to where we would be staying at, and I was relieved to hear there was a makeshift FOB, nothing fancy by any means, just an old green tent for the NCOs and upper-ranking battalion staff. Us boots would be sleeping under the stars in the dirt. At least we had a makeshift Hesco wall around us to make things feel a little bit more like home. During chow that evening, we were all sitting around just chatting, and I asked my sergeant what all the mine shafts in the hillsides were for. He said that they were munition storage facilities as well as fallout shelters. The base was designed and built in the Cold War era, which made it super creepy. It's like all the people just decided one day to leave. Vehicles were still there and everything. It was really strange. Night arrives. It was fairly hot out even though it was night, as we were back down in the desert. I was having problems sleeping even though I was just in my skivvies on top of my sleeping bag. Some of the others were awake, chatting, and then I stared into the stars and mountains looming over me. It was a full moon that night with hardly any clouds. As I was scanning the mountain tops, which I had to guess were 500 to 700 feet above me, from where we were sleeping, it made it seem like I could almost reach out and touch the top. I saw something strange moving about at the peak, figuring my eyes were playing tricks on me. From extreme physical exhaustion and sleep deprivation, I disregarded it. Even later that night, I awoke to take a leak. As I'm utilizing the head, I look up to where I saw something earlier, and to my surprise, the strange silhouetted figures were there scurrying about the ridgeline. Now this had definitely caught my interest as my mind was wandering. Thankfully, I had a lot of really cool stuff lying in my backpack at the biovac site. Once at my gear, I grabbed my trusty PVS night vision monocular. I bring them to my eye and look back up. Nothing. That can't be right. Like, huh? I swear I saw something. I look over to my buddy that was still awake and asked, "Hey, did you see something up there?" He looked at me like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I told him to forget about it. A few hours go by, and through the night, a loud crash comes from the closest mine shaft, which is located about 100 feet or so from the FOB. Literally half of the platoon sat up straight from a dead sleep. One of the sergeants screams from a nearby tent and says to hit the rack. It was just some rocks falling, which made sense for most of us. The next morning we woke up and did what we had planned to do for the day. Later that afternoon, we had some free time and were creeping around checking the nearby buildings out. 4 of us decided to go down into a building. It was half above ground and half below. The wide staircase went down to an open large cubicle type area. Barely any light came through the small windows. I clicked my weapon light and scanned the area. There were still papers and everything strewn about on top of desks. We followed the hallway, which made a turn. MOPP suits and gas masks lined the hallway, hanging on hooks. We see a sign above one of the doorways that said, "Girls' Locker Room." Us, being the typical 19-year-old Marines that we were, decided to check that out. I took point and entered the pitch-dark room. I was looking through the lockers trying to find anything interesting, when all of a sudden, the doors behind us slammed shut, and we all ran the hell out of there. 2 doors on either side of the room, with lockers lining the sides. That's my life story. When I was in Vilseck, Germany, the Rose Barracks, as part of the 1st Infantry Division, I had an interesting run. This was about the year 2001, and not so long after a long deployment in Kosovo. I was an E4 about to be promoted to sergeant and had a fellow NCO who named his Humvee Area 51. He told me he had been stationed there for a while as part of a security team, made up of Army and Air Force. He told me lots of bizarre stories about the things he saw and the rumors. He then introduced me to a website called the Black Vault. The website is still around, but far less conspiracy-driven these days, and it contained a lot of conspiracy theory stuff, Freedom of Information Act material about various UFO projects like the Blue Book project. With hindsight, it was probably a bad idea to look at this stuff on a government computer at work. He and I both had a series of encounters with military intelligence, and even an actual CIA spook over the next year. They went through my living quarters while I was at work, trailed us, and a year later I PSC'd, relocated to the National Guard in Texas, and it all ended. But it was a strange amount of attention to receive about a subject that's nonsense to our government. I am a corporal in the Army Cadets. Once we were out on Fieldcraft, which is a combat exercise down in Yorkshire. I'm Scottish, by the way. During our 2-week annual camp, we were in a harbour area, which is basically our camp for the duration of the exercise, and then we'd go back on base after the 3-day exercise. It was around 10 PM. We were waiting to receive contact from the adult instructors. I was on stag with my mate called Tom, and we were sitting talking while observing the forest around us, and we got contact, so we returned fire with blanks, and throughout the chaos of the engagement I saw a white figure near some of the trees. It was around 6 foot tall, and at the time I put it in the back of my mind until the engagement was over. I asked Tom if he had seen it, and his face went white. He thought he was just seeing things. We then asked the other guys in our section, and they said that they'd seen it too. The next day of the exercise nothing happened, and I still have no idea what that was. I'm in the Navy and work on an aircraft carrier. A girl sadly ended her life in one of the spaces right near where me and my shop slept. One person swore he saw her sitting in the chair as he was getting undressed one day and ran screaming out of the berthing. I waited about a week to go into the space where she ended her life, and when I did, I heard the loudest screeching noise I'd ever heard in my life. I quickly turned around and got the hell out of there. The system connected to where she slept didn't work at all for the next 2 weeks. The system breaks a lot, so it was pretty coincidental that it happened just as she did this. To set the scene, this story is from about 5 years ago, give or take a few months. I was 19, living in a very large city in the southern US, population nearly 2 million, with several military installations. I was dating a guy who at the time was in the army, and stationed on the joint base nearest to where I was living. I had a full-time job and was also in school, but all of my free time was spent with my boyfriend, and since he was in training at the time, he didn't have a car, so I was on and off that base constantly, and had gotten to know the gate guard. I still had to present my visitor pass and ID every time because of protocol, but they knew me. The base itself is huge, like its small little town in of itself. Driving onto the base by accident is impossible. There are a few entrances, but I usually used the second biggest one. To get there, you drove down a 5-lane road with 2 lanes each way and 1 turning lane. As you approach, there's a huge golf course that's part of the base, as well as our national cemetery, so huge fences and large signs stating it's government property. And to the right, some businesses, restaurants, barbers, dry cleaners, gas station, as well as a few residential neighborhoods with smaller side streets. But as you get closer to the gate, there's really nowhere to go except to the base, unless you're going to the physical rehab center / senior living center that's on the right, and literally the last place to turn in before you're going through the gates. The road leading into the base is really long, so as you go further away from the base on the same road, there's more businesses, more neighborhoods and more apartments, an HEB and a Walmart, both roughly 3 to 5 miles give or take from this gate. I also happened to use this road when I was going straight from work to pick up my boyfriend, as there's an exit from the interstate and is the most direct route. So I was just heading down the road, and one thing I'll note is that I'm pretty careful as a driver, since I got into a terrible car accident with my mum when I was 12 and was severely injured. I drive a little faster than the speed limit, but not too much, and always try and move out of the way for people going faster than me, because I know it can be annoying to be stuck behind someone driving slowly. I was about 2 miles from the base in the right-hand lane when I come up on someone slowing down to take a turn. I checked my mirrors, flicked on my blinkers, and went to make a lane change to go around them. There had been an old clunky blue van, like a Chevy Astra or something, in the left lane, but it was still pretty far back, and I was planning to move back to my lane anyway. As soon as I passed the car in front of me, Mr. Astro didn't like me getting into his lane when I was going slower than he was. Again, he was far enough back that if he maintained his speed, I'd have been back over before he even reached me, but no. I heard an engine rev, and all of a sudden this dude was right on my bumper, laying on his horn, making the typical rude gestures you'd expect. I've always been rather meek and quiet, and hate confrontation, so I was going to pull back into the right lane and get back over once I passed the car in front of me. But by then there was another car in that lane trying to speed past everyone, so I couldn't move over immediately. As I waited for the other car to pass by so I could move into the right lane, the Astra behind me is speeding up on my tail and then backing off just to speed up onto my tail again. The other car passes and I move into the right lane so the Astra can pass me. He sped up and then slowed so he was driving right next to my car. I glanced over and this older looking dude with raggedy hair and a dirty, ratty looking beard just stared over at me, still making rude gestures, and then made a gun sign with his hand and pointed his fingers at me and mimicked shooting me in the head. This really freaked me out, but not as much as when he slowed down even further and got right behind me again. This road could really be trafficky during rush hours, but I'd gotten off work early, around 3:45, so the traffic wasn't bad and he definitely did not need to be behind me anymore. There was so much room for him to just go around and leave behind me. Obviously freaked out, I tried to shake him. I changed lanes, but he followed. I slowed down, so he did, and so I got back into the right lane coming up on a light that had just turned yellow and made a pretty risky, very quick right turn onto that road, hoping he wouldn't be able to follow me. He apparently didn't care and took the turn right after me. I remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing the van practically leaning on the turn, and he was still yelling and making hand gestures. I took some more turns and started weaving through a neighborhood trying to lose him, but he was persistent. Finally, a moment of clarity hit me when I took a sharp turn and my visitor pass for base slid off the front seat. Duh. I wove through the neighborhood until I got back to the road we had been on, the one that leads straight to the base, and I booked it down that road with Mr. Astro right behind me. I saw him in my rear view as I pulled up to the gate and was terrified to see him pull in behind me. I thought there was no way this guy could follow me onto the base. At the time, they were in FPCON Bravo, which means no one could drive on base unless they had proper military staff ID or a 30-day visitor pass plus driving license. Luckily, I knew the guard at the gate. I pulled in and he could tell I was a bit frazzled because my hands were shaking as I handed him my pass and ID. Before he could ask, I said, "The guy in the car behind me is really scaring me. He's been following me for 15 minutes and making hand gestures and yelling, and he made finger guns like he was going to shoot me." The guard was super nice, smiled and nodded, and acted like everything was okay. Didn't even glance back at the van, and he told me, "Okay, don't you worry about it. You're in safe hands now. The guy won't get anywhere near you. Is your boyfriend done for the day?" I said, "No, I don't think he's done until 4:30. I was just going to read in my car until he finishes." He told me to go about with my plans, to head over to my boyfriend's barracks, and he and the other guards could handle it. I did exactly what he told me to do. My boyfriend's barracks weren't far back from the gate entrance, luckily, and after 2 turns I would be completely out of sight from the gate. I waited for my boyfriend, and when he came out I told him everything that happened. I was shaking and crying, and he ended up driving us back to my place. We exited from the main gate that was on the other side of the base. It was a longer drive home, but meant that we wouldn't run the risk of the guy possibly waiting on a side road for me to drive back out of the base. When I took him back that night, the guard had obviously done a shift change, but my boyfriend knew the one working and asked if she'd heard anything about a guy following someone. She was very excited to tell us that the dude in the blue van had been arrested by the military police. As it turned out, the dude tried to tell the guard I was his daughter and that I was just being difficult, and could he please let me go through to get me. The guard played it cool and pretended to be understanding, but said he needed to do a sweep of the car and they would have to have someone escort him to find me since he didn't have military ID nor visitor pass. The guy tried to say no, but the guard insisted. The guy tried to lead foot it through the military gate anyway. Clearly not a good idea to try and force your way onto a military installation. He didn't even make it a 1/4 mile before the military police had him pull over and cuffed him, and they found a gun in his center console. I don't know what that guy would have done to me had he caught up with me, assaulted, or anything worse. I no longer live in that city and I'm no longer dating that boyfriend. I have new license plates on my car and I live in a new state. And I have no idea what eventually happened to Mr. Astro. I'm pretty sure he did some jail time considering he tried to gun it through the base with a firearm in the console, but I have no idea how much time and have no desire to try and find out what happened to him. So yeah, Mr. Astro, let's never meet again. In basic training, there is a mock deployment for the Air Force called Beast Week. Basic is in Texas, and it's hot as hell. During this Beast Week, we go through basic deployment stuff, and live, kind of like we're deployed. So we have, I think, 10 very large tents in a circle, with a bunker in the middle surrounded by mostly desert. Every night there's 2 people on shift doing security for every tent. So as we're sitting there in the boring ass dark, looking at stars and talking about nonsense, we hear a very faint "help." But this wasn't a normal cry for help. This was the creepiest cry for help you've ever heard. So me and my other entry controller buddy are freaking out, and we look at each other, and I tell him to wait here and I'll check to see if the other ECs have heard anything. The 2 left of us said that they did hear something. One of them kind of recognized it as help, and the one further down on the left thought it sounded like an animal noise. I went to every tent that night and asked them to do a head count. We're all accounted for, and one of the other ECs was freaked out enough that they decided, you know what, let's tell Central Quarters. 20 minutes later, I'm getting my ass handed to me because I didn't report it immediately. I did, however, try to explain that we thought it was an animal because it was not a normal sounding help, and that everyone had heard it was freaked out. It freaked me out pretty well, not sure what it could have been. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. A huge thanks to all the incredible servicemen and women, not just of my country but of every country, who work tirelessly to keep all of us safe. Thank you all. I would just like to thank also my members and patrons who help keep the channel running. Names on screen, and if you'd like to be a part of it, you know what to do and where you can find the information to do so. The description. On a lighter note, I did a collaboration recently. It's quite different. As some of you may or may not know, I'm a very big fan of the animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender and its sequel, The Legend of Korra. I really love those shows. And I was invited to talk about my top 5 favorite characters from that show, the Avatar: The Legend of Aang, with Cinematics, a fellow channel. I really enjoyed making the video. It's quite fun, quite lighthearted, and if you're into that, then I'd ask you check it out. It was a lot of fun making the video, and yeah, I think the video is really good and definitely worth watching if you're interested. So I'm going to leave a link on screen now for you guys to check it out. Thank you all. But for now, stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.